revenge doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. One decision, one word, and suddenly an empire crumbles. For Caitlin Clark, revenge wasn't about firing shots on social media or snapping back in interviews. Her revenge was devastatingly simple. She said no. No to Geno Auriemma. No to UConn's legacy. No to the $1 million offer that came crawling back to her years later.
Like I said earlier, they actually had odds that, she was like third or fourth in the betting odds to be MVP of the WNBA. That's such a slap in the face to every WNBA player. It's unbelievable, right?
On paper, it looked absurd. Who walks away from over $1 million for just 8 weeks of basketball? But this wasn't just a contract. It was the lifeline of a man who once dismissed her, belittled her, and treated her like an afterthought. When Clark rejected it, she didn't just pass on a paycheck. She humbled the man who never thought he could be humbled.
That's the worst part about new fans. They have no perspective. There's no context. So they just say ridiculous nonsense.
And that's what makes this story bigger than basketball. It isn't just about points, assists, or trophies. It's about power. For decades, Geno Auriemma was the gatekeeper of women's basketball. The coach who decided who mattered, who got the spotlight, and who faded into obscurity. But Caitlin Clark flipped that script. She didn't need his approval, his program, or his checkbook. She built her empire without him. And when he finally reached out, she turned him away with the kind of quiet authority that says, "I don't need you. You need me." Every revenge story starts with a mistake. Geno's wasn't a blown play or a bad timeout. It was arrogance, pure, blinding arrogance. Before Clark became the face of the sport, before the sold-out arenas and record-shattering TV ratings, she was just a kid with a dream. She admitted it openly. UConn was the coolest place on earth. The dynasty, the empire, the home of Taurasi, Moore, Stewart, the mountaintop of women's basketball. For a girl growing up in Iowa, there was nothing bigger. And when recruitment time came, the path seemed obvious. The most electrifying talent of her generation pairing with the greatest recruiter the game had ever known. But the call never came. Geno never picked up the phone, never called Clark, never called her parents, barely even sent a message through her AAU coach. For the greatest recruiter of all time, that silence was deafening. And it wasn't an oversight, it was a choice. The message was clear. She wasn't their priority. His excuse? UConn had already locked in Paige Bueckers and he didn't want 2-point guards. On the surface, fine. But then came the insult. Geno suggested that if Clark really wanted UConn, she should have called him. Think about that. The coach who built his legacy on spotting once-in-a-generation talent years before anyone else decided Caitlin Clark wasn't worth the effort, then blamed a teenager for not chasing him. That wasn't just a recruiting miss, it was disrespect, the kind you don't forget. And in return, Clark quietly filed it away. If Geno didn't believe in her, she'd go somewhere that did. So she chose Iowa, a program without UConn's banners, mystique, or dynasty glow. To many, it looked like a consolation prize. But for Clark, it was liberation. At Iowa, she wasn't Paige's shadow. She wasn't Geno's afterthought. She was the recruit, the one who would carry the program. And from the second she laced up in Iowa City, she rewrote the script. Her logo threes weren't just shots, they were statements. Her sold-out arenas weren't just crowds, they were proof. Her record-shattering TV ratings weren't flukes, they were receipts. Every basket, every viral highlight, every broken record was a reminder. You missed this. Meanwhile, Geno doubled down. Instead of humility, he leaned on arrogance. He brushed her off with condescending soundbites, calling her a kid playing like she's in the driveway. Instead of acknowledging her as a generational force, he tried to shrink her brilliance into something ordinary. But ordinary doesn't sell out Madison Square Garden. Ordinary doesn't drag the WNBA into mainstream relevance. Ordinary doesn't cost you millions, and that's where the irony bites deepest. Geno closed the door when Caitlin Clark knocked. He thought she'd fade into just another good player. Instead, she built the biggest empire women's basketball has ever seen, without him. And when he finally circled back, contract in hand, Clark didn't rage. She didn't gloat. She simply said no. And that one word cost him more than a championship loss ever could. Geno Auriemma just couldn't help himself. Anytime Caitlin Clark's name came up, he found a way to drag her back into Paige Becker's comparisons. If Clark was fearless, well, Paige was too. If Clark was connecting with fans, so had Paige. It wasn't random, it was strategy. By tethering Clark's rise to his chosen players, Geno kept himself in the spotlight. He wanted the world to believe her success was nothing new, nothing separate from the dynasty he built. But backhanded compliments wear thin, and people noticed. Fans noticed. Analysts noticed. Other coaches noticed. They saw through the act. Clark's brilliance didn't need qualifiers. She was drawing bigger crowds than most professional franchises, breaking records the sport had never seen, and rewriting the conversation around women's basketball. Yet there was Geno, smiling for the cameras while subtly clinging to his throne. Behind the charm was insecurity, the kind that comes when the spotlight is moving away and there's nothing you can do to stop it. And eventually, the mask slipped. The sly digs weren't enough anymore. Geno went from undermining Clark to outright attacking the people who supported her. For months, his strategy had been shade disguised as commentary. Then, in June 2024, during an interview on The Dan Patrick Show, he crossed a line he could never walk back. The Hall of Fame coach, the man who was supposed to represent the pinnacle of women's basketball, didn't just question Caitlin Clark. He went after her fans.
The delusional fan base that follows her disrespected the WNBA players by saying she's going to go in that league and tear it apart. There were actually odds on she's third or fourth in betting odds on being MVP at the WNBA. These people are so disrespectful and so unknowledgeable and so stupid that it gives women's basketball a bad name. Okay, so the kid was set up for failure right from the beginning.
His words weren't subtle. He called her supporters delusional. He said they didn't understand the game. And then, unbelievably, he claimed they were so clueless they were damaging women's basketball itself. What crime had they committed? Believing Clark could finish top 4 in MVP voting as a rookie. To Geno, that wasn't passion. It was stupidity.
And Diana said it best. This kid's in for a rude awakening.
Think about that for a second. Millions of new eyes had just flooded into women's basketball because of Clark. Families were showing up in jerseys, kids were camping out to meet her. Casual fans were tuning into WNBA broadcasts for the first time ever. And Geno's response wasn't gratitude, wasn't celebration, but insult. Instead of welcoming the wave of new energy, he mocked it. This wasn't analysis. This wasn't a coach breaking down strengths and weaknesses. This was personal. It was a direct shot at the lifeblood of Clark's movement, the very people who had carried women's basketball into the mainstream spotlight. Geno wasn't just dismissing Clark, he was dismissing the fans who made her rise possible. And because he's Geno Auriemma, people listened. His words carried weight, which is what made them so damaging and so revealing. By calling her fans clueless, he wasn't just underestimating them. He was underestimating her. He was saying the hype wasn't real, that the success wasn't sustainable, that in the end, he'd be proven right. But here's where the story turns delicious. Geno wasn't right. He wasn't even close. Clark didn't clap back on Twitter. She didn't cut interviews. She didn't need to. Her response came the only place that mattered, the court. And what followed wasn't just vindication. It was a demolition of Geno's credibility. Caitlin Clark went out and won Rookie of the Year. She didn't stop there. She made all WNBA first team. And when the MVP votes were counted, she finished exactly 4th. Right where her supposedly delusional fans had predicted she would. The very prediction Geno laughed at became reality. And with it, his authority crumbled. It wasn't just a win for Clark. It was vindication for her fans, the ones he had mocked and insulted. Every parent who brought their kid to see her. Every casual fan who tuned in. Every new supporter who bought into the hype. Geno dismissed them as a problem. Clark proved they were prophetic. And the beauty of it? She did it without saying a word. Silent revenge. No rant, no confrontation, no drama. Just results. Night after night, she delivered performances that left no room for excuses. Logo threes. Crossovers that froze defenders. Assists that lit up highlight reels. By the time the awards came in, there was no debate. She had silenced him without ever speaking his name. Do you see the poetry in that? Geno had positioned himself as the gatekeeper of women's basketball knowledge. The wise elder who knew better than the fans, better than the media, better than anyone else. And yet, the fans were right. Clark was right. Geno was wrong. Every arena she sold out, every record she shattered, every accolade she earned was another reminder that he wasn't the kingmaker anymore. She didn't need him. She never did. And here's the irony. Clark wasn't trying to prove Geno wrong. She wasn't chasing his approval. She wasn't even thinking about him. She was just being Caitlin Clark. And that was enough to expose him, enough to humble him, enough to show the world that he was no longer the one shaping the narrative. She was. By the end of her rookie year, it wasn't just about whether Clark had lived up to the hype. It was about how completely she had obliterated every doubt. Geno's insults didn't age well. They aged like milk in the sun. His comments about her fans now read like some of the worst takes in sports history. Bitter, insecure, and embarrassingly wrong. But Geno couldn't let go. Being wrong wasn't something he could stomach. And by now, it wasn't just about Clark's game. It was about what she represented. The changing of the guard, the shift in power, the undeniable truth that women's basketball no longer revolved around him. And instead of accepting it, he did what he always does. He kept talking. Interview after interview, podcast after podcast, her name never far from his lips. And each time, the pattern repeated. A little praise, a little dig, a compliment wrapped in a disclaimer. But the more he talked, the more obvious it became. Caitlin Clark wasn't just rewriting the record books. She was living rent-free in Geno Auriemma's head. At some point, words stopped being enough. Geno Auriemma had spent months trying to shape the narrative with sly comparisons, backhanded compliments, and digs at Clark's fans. But Clark kept winning, kept shining, and his influence kept shrinking. So he pivoted. If he couldn't control the narrative with his mouth, maybe he could do it with money. That's how the $1 million offer came into play. By then, Geno had already tried everything. He ignored her as a teenager. He brushed off her rise. He belittled her supporters. He tried to reframe her stardom as just another byproduct of UConn's dynasty. None of it worked. Clark kept climbing, and Geno kept fading. Then came an opportunity wrapped in dollar signs. A brand new venture, unrivaled, a 3-on-3 women's league backed by Brianna Stewart and Nafisa Collier, with Geno deeply involved behind the curtain. The league had ambition, it had funding, but it didn't have the one thing that mattered most, a face.
And there's a lot of investors in this league. One investor, been trying to keep quiet about, his investment in the league ever since his comments that he made about a young rookie. Pretty much, had him in the headlines for about a month and a half. That is Geno Auriemma, dog. I'm here to tell you, he's part owner of this league.
And that's when the desperation was laid bare. Because for all the big names involved, only one player could give the project instant legitimacy. Only one athlete could drag in millions of fans, media partners, and sponsors. Only one star had the kind of gravitational pull to turn unrivaled into a real rival for the WNBA. That star was Caitlin Clark. And so, Geno did the unthinkable. He came knocking. Reports confirmed the league offered Clark over $1 million for an 8-week season, one of the richest contracts ever presented in women's basketball. Let that sink in. The same coach who once wouldn't pick up the phone during her recruitment was now dangling 7 figures, practically begging for her to save his new league. The same man who told the world her hype wasn't real was suddenly trying to monetize it. The same coach who called her fans delusional now needed those same delusional fans to stream his games and buy his tickets. The irony was delicious.
This one looked like Geno Auriemma. could be the reason why Caitlin Clark is definitely not joining the unrivaled 3-on-3 basketball league.
Make no mistake, this wasn't just business, this was personal. If Geno landed Clark, he could twist the story. He could claim her rise was still tied to his system, his vision, his authority. He could present her as an extension of the empire he built rather than the symbol of its collapse. But Clark wasn't fooled. When the contract slid across her desk, she didn't see opportunity. She saw a test, a desperate power grab from a man who had spent years trying to minimize her.
They've tried to do everything they could to make the most of the situation. They tried to make the most of Caitlin Clark not playing by hinting everything and basically making people think that Caitlin Clark was going to play.
Her answer was swift and devastating. No. No explanations. No hedging. No hesitation. Just one word that carried more weight than all of Geno's interviews combined. She didn't need his money. She didn't need his platform. She didn't need his approval. The very man who once brushed her aside was now asking for help, and she declined with a grace that cut deeper than any clapback ever could. And with that no, the humiliation was complete. Geno Auriemma, the gatekeeper who built his reputation on spotting and molding talent, had been reduced to offering a fortune to the one player he once dismissed. And she turned him down flat, quietly, decisively, without bitterness, without drama, just rejection. The fallout was brutal. Without Clark, Unrivaled lost its magnet, its centerpiece, its credibility. The $1 million offer became less a show of strength and more an admission of weakness. The project needed her more than she ever needed it. And when she walked away, the hype collapsed before it even started. Fans knew exactly what they were watching. Social media lit up with laughter and mockery, clowning Geno for thinking Clark would ever save him after years of disrespect. The chess match he thought he was orchestrating ended in a single move, and Clark didn't even break a sweat. She didn't rant. She didn't drag him. She didn't even acknowledge him beyond her decision. She just walked away. And that silence hurt more than any words could. Because here's the truth. Geno's era is over. His power is gone. And Caitlin Clark didn't just dethrone him. She torched the throne entirely. For decades, Geno and the old guard decided who mattered in women's basketball. They controlled the pathways, the narratives, the opportunities. If you wanted to be great, you had to go through them. But Clark shattered that model. She didn't need UConn's banners to validate her. She didn't need Geno's blessing to shine. She built her empire from scratch, and in rejecting his $1 million offer, she sent a clear message. The future belongs to the players, not the gatekeepers. That's why this story stings so deeply for Geno. His biggest mistake wasn't ignoring Clark as a recruit. His biggest mistake was assuming the sport couldn't grow without him. He thought he was indispensable. She proved he was irrelevant. And the humiliation didn't just belong to him. It was a warning shot to every coach, every executive, every power broker still clinging to the illusion of control. Clark's rejection wasn't just personal revenge, it was cultural. It marked a shift in power, a line in the sand between the old guard and the new. She showed an entire generation of athletes they don't need permission, validation, or approval to lead. They've got the fans, the numbers, and the star power to chart their own path. And she proved it with the simplest of weapons, a single no. So maybe the old saying is wrong. Maybe revenge isn't best served cold. Maybe the sweetest revenge is served quietly, with calm finality, in the form of one rejection that exposes just how desperate your enemy has become. Caitlin Clark didn't just reject a contract, she rejected Geno's system, his authority, his entire worldview. And in doing so, she didn't just win, she changed the game. Do you think Geno deserved it? Let us know down in the comments. Like, subscribe, and turn on all notifications so you never miss out. Click the video on the screen, and we will see you in the next one.